Scranton, Pennsylvania is nicknamed the Electric City because the first electric streetcar was developed there in 1886. Hello and welcome to the Mochiverse. I'm Lynette.
And I'm Skip. And you can see we're getting a little silly this morning.
Yeah, we're punchy. This is going to be a fun one to edit. I'm already really looking forward to it. I'm going to be laughing, and Richard's going to be like, "What's so funny?" I'm like, "This."
Yeah.
So we better get our laughs in now, though, because today is kind of a sad one. It's a sad one that I didn't expect. I guess I wouldn't have expected a long time ago, but by the time I researched this, I kind of knew. But we're gonna do not really a biography, but it's a history story, I guess, now that it's been a while. And the other reason I wanted to do this one, I actually wanted to do this one from the very beginning because it has a lot of dad meanings for me in a lot of different ways. I'm sure you know why. So there's a whole dad origin story tangentially connected to this one. So we're going to talk about a song, and we're going to talk about the backstory to the song. This is going to be the tragic events that inspired a folk song, modern day folk song, Harry Chapin's 30,000 Pounds of Bananas. Hopefully some of you listening have heard of the song. It was pretty popular. We'll get into that. But if not, I encourage you to go ahead and find it. It is on Amazon. It's everywhere. You can find it and listen to it. If you want to pause the episode, listen to it first, and then listen to our episode and listen to it again. You may have a completely different perspective. So that's a little project for you. Let's see if anybody does that. Okay, so music. Anybody who knows me knows that music was a really big part of my childhood. It's a really big part of my life today. But more specifically, the influence that I got directly from you, Dad, with music. Because I was always around you, especially when you were listening to your favorite music. So, it's the kind of thing where if you have a kid and you're spending a lot of time with the kid, you're going to play your music, and the kid picks up on some of it usually. It's kind of a cool thing that happens. And you always sort of want it to happen in a little way. And then later on they stray and start to listen to their terrible stuff. Or if you're lucky, they always have the same taste as you. But I was always there with you, like being in the car. You used to purposely sing the lyrics wrong on all the songs that came on the radio. The subject matter of most songs in the car was about Kyle Yastrzemski's haircut, which is like big news apparently all the time.
Yeah.
Or you would purposely sing really loudly off key to I said in my notes comic effect, but you're trying to piss off Sue, I think, most of the time. Or piss off us, like ruining the song. I don't know if you feel this way, but because you're ever playing a song that you wanted to play and you put it on and somebody starts talking over it or making comments or like dissing the song, you're like, all right, I'm going to pause it and start it over because I'm listening to this song right now. Like, don't do this.
I'm chilling on the words. I'm listening to the words. Listen.
Yeah, okay, let's pause. You want to talk about something? Let's pause and then they're always like, wow, I'm sorry. I didn't know I pissed you off. It's like, no, it's important. It's the song I'm listening to.
Yep.
But yeah, so the big one for me was Harry Chapin. It was one of the tapes you always had. It was one of the albums you always played, specifically Verities and Balderdash, which was one of his more popular albums. And we listened to it a lot, but the big song for us, it's like our song, is Cats in the Cradle, which of course. So I was going to give you an opportunity to maybe talk about the backstory of why that song is our song.
Yeah, Cats in the Cradle is, if anybody's ever listened to the song, Cats in the Cradle, Silver Spoon, and a lot of the recurring theme of it is dad was busy all the time and kid wants to play ball and he says, real busy right now. and we'll get together soon. Okay, Dad. And it goes on and on and on. And before you know it, at the end of it, it turns around that we'll get together soon, which is really kind of the theme of it. And
Yeah.
what it come down to for me was, at the time, I was working for the phone company, and we're originally from Massachusetts, and I had a temporary duty up in Maine for 3 6 months, however long it was. It was just right after you were born. And I was always, and this song was very popular at the time, and I was pretty emotional about not seeing the
Mhm.
things of you, the events of you growing up and developing, and it was really bothering me that I would miss that.
Right.
So I wanted to make it my business to do it. And at the time, like I say, it became a very common thread in my brain about making sure that when I was home, that we spent time, and I was constantly in communication, because I didn't want to miss the things,
Right.
the growing up things that go by too quickly, uh, and feeling that somewhere down the future, whatever the choices would be made based on a personal decision rather than a decision about how the dad was absent or the
Right.
parent was absent.
Right.
So anyway, it's a little bit maudlin thinking about that way, but that's why that song was kind of important to me. And later on, I believe I did explain to you why, as you got older, why that was important. So you got to
Mhm.
understand why it was important to me.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. And
yeah.
I mean, it's a beautifully written song. Harry Chapin really had a way of writing beautiful stories and really getting you with what he had to say.
Mhm.
And even just the imagery in what he's writing, it's like every verse is like just the other day,
Mhm. Yep.
which means a lot because it's like, he just my child arrived just the other day, my child turned 10 just the other day,
Yep.
and it was like that. And also just to lighten the mood a little bit, one of my favorite jokes when I was younger was when you hear the line, he came to the world in the usual way. You would
Mhm.
always make that personal for me
Yeah.
because I did not come into the world in the
The
usual
usual
way.
way, right?
So so I was born breech. And so whenever that that lyric came up, he came to the world in the usual way, you'd say like, but first.
Yeah, and it's to me, jokingly, it's a statement. It says, "Here I am, world."
Yeah, exactly. How about you kiss this?
Yeah.
But and then the entire song, the whole course of the song, it has a lot of really deep meanings to it, like just the way he feels about his kid, feels about missing things, how good-natured the kid is about it all.
Mm.
And you can tell that he's sad about that already when his kid is 10 and his dad, he can't play catch or whatever. And he's like, okay, that's okay. And he walked away, but his smile never dimmed. And he's
Mm.
already proud of he wants to be like him instead of being disappointed by him,
Right.
which is
Yep.
like, wow. And that probably makes him as the father even more sad because
Yep.
he's like, this kid wants to be just like me, and I'm not spending enough time with him. It's like really a lot of layers. And then
Mm.
in the end, when the son doesn't really have enough time for his dad, he's proud of him and sad about it at the same time, which is like that was something Harry Chapin had a good knack for, is mixing a lot of different emotions,
Yep.
I think,
Yep.
in his songwriting. So it's a very important song to both of us for those reasons. It's a really great song.
Yep.
And it's catchy too, which is like people can
Yeah.
sing it and they know it. But Harry Chapin as a whole, Harry Chapin is like, for me in my mind, Harry Chapin is you anyways. Like it's like he's like the stand-in sometimes. So like it was sort of like there were a few artists that were like kind of stand-ins for you.
Mhm.
Billy Joel was one too. I don't know why, but Billy Joel was always like, yeah, he's my dad too, and Harry Chapin's my dad. I don't know why. It was just like a weird thing. It was
Yeah.
always associated with you because a lot of times we listened to the music together, and there were just aspects of certain of the songs that were like ingrained in memories. So but that's not the song we're going to talk about today.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But I did think it was important to talk about. So
Yep.
we're going to talk about another song which was not released as a single on that album, and it was 30,000 Pounds of Bananas. Now, I'm going to talk more about the song itself later, but the summary of the song, if you've never heard it, it's a folk song, and it's I think what he was going for, it's a folk song in the tradition of old disaster folk songs. Like if you think of that song Big John,
Mhm.
or other songs in the folk tradition that talk about something terrible that happened. You're singing the story in order to memorialize it. And it is folksy. And part of being folksy is sometimes a little bit absurd or a little bit weird. So the story of the song is about a very bad car accident, truck accident that happened in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And basically, a driver who lost control of his vehicle. And but the kicker that makes it interesting for the song, and what makes it a folk song that people can remember, is that he was hauling bananas, which bananas inherently are kind of an oddball thing, right? You associate them with humor because banana peels, and just the word is a funny word, and that whole spiel, which I'll talk about later.
The way he used to do his concerts is what you was, he had,
Right. Being a huge fan of Harry Chapin, I had one of his concert videos, and you can really tell. I've seen a lot of different videos of his concerts later on. He had a very heavy audience participation in his concerts, and his concerts were they were sing-alongs. They were like, they felt a lot like family gatherings. Like he really connected with his audience, and he involved his whole band. Like that song "All My Life's a Circle," his entire band sings it. And actually, in one live concert I was listening to yesterday, he brings up the roadies and has them sing a verse of the song in it. So that's really, really cool. He had like, he had a cello player. He had his brother in the band. He had John Wallace, which was his bandmate, had an incredible vocal range. Like if you ever listen to the song Mr. Tanner, which I think is on that same album. Um, Beautiful baritone, but like also John Wallace could sing almost in like a, it wasn't really falsetto, but it really sounded like a soprano range when he's singing um, some of his other songs. I think he sang, I think it was in Taxi
Taxi. Yeah, he was in Taxi. Yeah.
when he sang the high notes.
Yep.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Um, John Wallace's voice in the song lends a lot of comedy to it. Um, and I think that's because of basically the reception of the band. But yeah, it really does seem like his concerts were a great experience to see. Like they really felt like, and he was like, Harry Chapin, he was a complicated guy. Like, I mean, his death, there was some speculation that the accident that caused his death was, his fault. And then there was some stuff around his death that I'll talk about later that like people retroactively blamed him and his wife for. It was like a whole big thing. But I think in general, he was like a really charitable guy. He was quite a hippie.
Hmm.
He was very emotional. He was very empathic. And so a lot of the stories, the slice of life sort of human stories that he did were they were quite important. But I will talk about a little bit more later about how the song was connected to the real story, and also how my idea of the song changed over the years after I learned about like the origin story. But I mean, the episode isn't really about the song so much as it is about the actual events that happened, because they are quite sad. And I do think it's important that we know about the two separate things, because the song did add like a cultural significance to the story, but there's a lot of cringy stuff that goes on with it too. So, and some irony, unfortunately, because of spoilers, Harry Chapin's death. But so today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the real story that literally Harry Chapin heard about on a bus from an old guy about this tragic accident that happened, and he instantly decided to turn it in. He knew he wanted to make it into a folk song. He wanted to make it into that kind of a story. So we're going to talk about Eugene Sesky. The events of this accident I got from various sources, but the bulk, just to put me in the right track and not get too far off, was summarized from Wikipedia. I also will say that I read about 30,000 old newspaper articles on the incident when I used to still subscribe to newspapers.com. But I don't pay for that anymore, so I couldn't really refresh my memory. It's a really good site, by the way, if anybody wants to subscribe to newspapers.com. It's a really good resource, but at the time I wasn't using it enough to make it worth the money. So maybe if they sponsor us, we'll start paying. It was like $14 a month or whatever. Um, so this was March 18th, 1965, and it was in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The driver was Eugene P. Sesky. He was 33. He was on his way back from New Jersey in a 1950s Brockway diesel truck, which I'm sure you know what that means. It's what it looks like. It's a very, I looked at the pictures of the truck and, it was upside down, but it's a really old looking truck. Like it looks like one of those really old farm trucks,
Yeah.
like very, I would say early 1950s. This thing looked very old. I feel like the fact that this was already kind of an older truck is relevant, although maybe since cars and trucks used to last longer back in the day, that I might be wrong about that. But nowadays, a 15-year-old truck might have been needing some maintenance that it might not have gotten, right?
Mhm.
Especially since he worked for a small trucking company. And so you can imagine that maybe some corners were cut and that might have led to what happened. I mean, all I know is my car that I just got rid of was 14 years old and that thing was just about to fall apart. So I know they don't make them like they used to, but still. So he was heading for the A&P produce warehouse on Southside. Fun fact, A&P grocery stores actually stayed open until 2015. I don't think I ever went to one, but I was looking at descriptions of them and they seem like a smaller chain grocery store, that like a neighborhood grocery store that everybody went to.
Mhm.
Um, it kind of reminds me of like Crosby's in Salem. How it was like not everybody went to Market Basket.
Yep.
There's like the smaller ones that had maybe different items in them and stuff. Also, I looked up the location where the produce warehouse was. I couldn't really find it in Scranton, but in the area of the South Side, there's like a lot of farmers markets and produce stands, which is kind of nice. But I think I'm probably romanticizing the story a little too much. But anyway,
Mm.
um, so the last leg of Sesky's route was on Route 307, which, just like in the song, has a 2 mile descent. And it's like this curving, windy road that drops. It has more than a 500-foot drop in elevation in a space of less than 2 miles. So you can imagine it would be treacherous. Like it just really drops. So it's like, and also this was in March. I don't know what the weather was like, but Pennsylvania is really cold in the winter and in the early spring. I think we went there in the early spring and it was freezing in Pennsylvania when we
Yeah.
went. Um, so I don't know about the weather conditions. I don't think it was like snowing or icy, but I can imagine that winters and early springs would have really sucked on that road. So Sesky was on the hill and something happened to the truck. So I read some newspaper articles that I still was able to access. And the Wikipedia article said it was either the brakes or the clutch, but then I was reading a newspaper article that they were interviewing a mechanic who was inspecting the truck afterwards, and he said something about the clutch had gone.
Well, it could be the clutch, just downshifting to try to hit, to go down the hill. If you're
Right.
not able to downshift enough to get the engine to work to slow it
Correct.
down.
I guess the what the guy I wish I had written that down because it was in the newspaper article. Basically, a part of the clutch was sheared off.
Hmm.
So, and they could tell that it was the clutch. There was like, I don't know car terms, clutch plate, clutch something was completely sheared off, and the car was in first gear, or the truck was in first gear.
Hmm.
So that sign that was at the top of the hill, which was really it's mentioned in the song, but it really was at that top of the hill that said you have to shift to lower gear or you get a $50 fine.
Right.
It didn't say my friend, but it just said you have to get a $50 fine. And so he did correctly shift his car into that lower gear at the top of the hill. But what might have happened is if part of that clutch had failed, then it would have put too much pressure on the brakes and then the brakes would have failed. And that's
Right.
why he had no brakes going down the hill. So anyway, that's what happened. He had no brakes going down this hill, which is 2 miles with a 500-foot drop. He had no way to slow the truck down. So as the truck sped down this hill, it reached about 90 miles an hour, just like in the song, sideswiping cars and trees, telephone poles, and according to witnesses, basically Seski knew that this truck was out of control. He knew he was hitting stuff. He knew that there were pedestrians and there were people around because it was like in the afternoon. And there was a gas station that he was heading towards. And he knew that if he hit that, there would be an explosion and more people would be hurt. So he actually climbed out of the truck and he was standing on the running board, according to witnesses, and waving his arms and trying to get people out of the way. So he really was trying hard to do whatever he could. The truck then flipped over, crashed into, I could see, like, based on the picture I saw, it crashed into two houses, but it actually crashed into a telephone pole and it flipped over completely. Obviously, Seski was thrown from the truck because he was standing outside on the board there, and he was killed right away. Oh, some of the witnesses suggested that he deliberately flipped the truck in order to avoid more pedestrians because, he just knew it was going to be really bad news if he just let it go the way it was going. So the crash happened near the intersection of Musick Street and South Irving Ave. And if anybody's interested, you can look that up. I looked it up on Google Maps. It's a residential area with tons of houses. It's like one of those city residential, like kind of like Salem, where the houses are all very close to each other and it's just like a block of houses, good size houses, like all in a square. I actually saw the house that he landed in front of, that his body was in front of, which was 102 South Irving Street. There was kind of a nice article that I read talking about a local priest or minister who was there. He was able to come and pray for him until help arrived, even though he was already gone. But the article talks about him, the minister or the priest, being directly affected because his car had been hit by the truck. And then, like back when I was still with newspapers.com, I thought I read that the truck had crashed into the living room. It doesn't really say that in the articles that I could access today, but there was something about another person was killed. But according to most sources, he was the only one who died that day. But there were a lot of injuries, though. Some of the newspapers said 10, some said 16, and these were all being reported right at the time. So there's a lot of inconsistencies about who was injured and everything. But I mean, Wikipedia says 15, so it's really hard to say. So in the article, there was one article, actually, speaking of inconsistencies with newspapers and reporting, there was one article. It was a very short article. It was almost like one of those police blotter types little blurbs that talked about the accident. And it just says like one person was killed, 15 people injured or whatever. And then it said the driver was decapitated. And I'm wondering, there was a lot of like stories. If you go online, there's like different message boards who talk about that. But according to all the other sources, he was not. So he didn't lose his head, not to mention an arm or two. Look at the song. But it's very interesting how the newspaper articles can vary so much when something's happening.
Yeah, to me, when I heard he lost his head, it's more like I didn't take the picture of being decapitated. I thought he was just losing his mind because he
Losing his mind
couldn't
because
do
he's
anything about what he was trying to do.
right, right. That's what I thought at first too. But as soon as he says not to mention an arm or two, I was like, oh, he
Right.
lost his head. Yeah.
He lost his head. Yeah,
Yeah. But
exactly.
there was one article that said he was decapitated, and then you can find back when I was researching this last year,
Mhm.
3 or 4 articles that repeated that, but then the majority of the rest of them, that's not what happened. So I think, a lot of local newspapers do kind of copy each other too, and
Yeah.
especially like Associated Press, they'll take information from it and just put it in their paper. I mean, they weren't banking on the fact that somebody was going to save this and compare it to something else years later. But so because of this accident, trucks over 21,000 pounds are no longer allowed on that route. They have to they have to go around to like a different way to get to into Scranton. And looking at the aftermath of that photo, it's pretty gnarly. Like you can see the overturned truck, the telephone poles are leaning to the side. You can see like damage to the houses, and there are indeed bananas all over the place, like all over the ground. There's like, firemen kind of like standing around for the picture and stuff. And it does look really, really bad. So it was pretty sobering to look at that. Because of the inconsistencies, I wondered, while I was writing these notes, if when Harry Chapin was writing the song, he did a small amount of research. I'm wondering though, I'm kind of on the fence. I'm kind of in two minds about it because I don't know if he read newspaper articles. I think he was trying to keep away from the actual accident and just going by the story he'd heard. But then the decapitation thing, I wondered if he must have heard it from the guy on the bus, maybe. That must
Yeah.
be it. But one of one of Sesky's sons was legitimately mad at Harry Chapin, which we'll talk about. Um, but newspapers with their inconsistencies, I'll talk about that too later. So that was what happened, March 18th, 1965. It was in the papers for weeks afterwards. And every 10 years or so on the anniversary, you could find a newspaper article about it. Especially after the song was released, like they would do articles all the time about it. In the articles from 1965, there's no mention of what he was hauling. But then after the song came out, almost every article either mentions the song or mentions that he was hauling bananas,
Right.
which I found very interesting. And when I see that, I can understand if you're still living in Scranton and you're this guy's family, how that would be really upsetting. But yeah, so let's um let's go back and talk about, before I get too much into the anger of the family and the controversy, let's talk about the song itself. Harry Chapin, he was a folk singer. He was famous for telling real stories in some of his songs. Like he just, like I said before, he just had a knack of just capturing like everyday type stuff, working class stuff. A lot of his songs are about working class, usually men. Um,
Mhm.
and because he's a folk singer, there is a lot of humor in his songs too, because you're trying to make them interesting. He was kind of a silly, goofy guy too. So, and he had, he has his brother with him, he had his friends with him. Generally, the ones that were inspired by true events were more like cautionary tales. If you ever heard What Made America Famous, he was talking about that fire, and that's not a goofy song at all. It's talking about a fire that happens in a tenement house, and how the whole town really didn't give a shit except for one guy who was a volunteer firefighter who went and got the truck himself when everybody else was too busy watching dirty movies on their day off. And he went and he rescued everybody from the tenement house, and how that was really important. But he sets up the song by talking about how hated the people in the tenement house were from the perspective of one of the residents who just happened to be like a hippie.
Mhm.
By the people in the town, the conservative people in the town. So a lot of his stuff had that kind of flair to it. And this song definitely has a flair of a criticism about treatment of the working class by rich people, corporations, all of that stuff. And he's definitely talking about that. Originally, when he heard about the accident, just like he says in the song, he heard about it from someone on a bus. And it was literally an old guy who told him the story. And the old guy probably said, sure must have been something.
Yeah.
Which, like again, it's humorous, but also it's humorous because we can identify with it as a humanistic thing. I guess. I don't know. I'm just defending it a lot, I guess. But so he was fascinated, and I think he did a little bit of research, but I think mostly he used his imagination, just like kind of like Stephen King, where he, stays one night in a creepy hotel, and then 2 weeks later he's got an entire story called The Shining. You know what I mean? His imagination went, and he had a way of inventing characters and inventing stories. So he did change a lot of the facts, not a lot of the facts of the accident, but a lot of the facts of the person. I guess it's less interesting that it was a family man who was in his mid 30s. I think Harry's choice of it being a young a young man who was sort of thinking about his young, sexy, hot wife, and then his day would be over and he could be with his young, hot wife, may have been more interesting a thing to him when he was writing it. Unfortunately, it kind of paints Harry Chapin as dissing Eugene Sesky and making him out to something that he really wasn't. And there's a lot of people who have that opinion online. But according to people around Chapin, when he originally pitched the song to his band, he pitched it as, you know, your basic folk song, disaster folk song that had some commentary about overworked working class people. Um, but unfortunately, the band thought it was really funny because of the bananas thing.
Hmm.
They
I mean,
just,
who's not gonna laugh about bananas, you know?
because bananas, like you said before, bananas are funny. It's a funny word. You can't say bananas like in an angry voice. You just can't.
You drove me bananas.
Yeah,
It's like
bananas.
it's not it's different than you piss me off, you know. So
Right, exactly. And like there's that whole thing going around that like if you say bananas in that Liam Neeson accent, it sounds very intense, but that's the only way. Hey, bananas. That's the only way you could do it.
right.
But a lot of the facts of the accident are in his song about, the sign telling you to put your truck in low gear, uh, the actual, the brakes failing ultimately, the the actual damage that happened. I mean, he says sideswiped 19 Eat Park cars, clipped off 13 telephone poles, hit two houses, bruised eight trees, and blue crossed seven people. He blue crossed 15 people, but very close. And of course that worked. That was a that's like a tight lyric for a song from Harry
Right.
Chapin. So once the band decided that bananas are funny and they should go with that and they're going to have a catchy song, they
Hmm.
reworked the song a little bit and they fictionalized the driver quite a bit and it became what it is today. Now, that song, they never released it as a single, but it became a huge hit at his concerts. They did that song at every concert, no matter what album Harry Chapin was doing, all the way up until his death, which was only like, I want to say his death was only like 6 years later, unfortunately. But there was a lot of audience participation in that because what he would do was he'd sing the song, and of course he'd have Big John go, "Oh, bananas," it's kind of funny, haha. And then at the end, he said, "Well, so I wrote this ending," and then he would sing an ending, and then he would say, "So then I pitched that to the band, and the band said to me," and then the band is like, "Harry, it sucks." And the audience would laugh. And he did like two alternate endings, and then he did, okay, but this is the ending I really went with. And then he went the ending about the man who told me about it on the bus. And then what he does is at the end of the song, he makes it faster and more intense and scary. Right.
That's the
So
music trick.
the music trick, yes. And so the Harry It Sucks thing became like a big thing at their concerts. They had t-shirts. I really like, if anybody's looking for Christmas ideas for me, they need to go on eBay and try to find me one of those Harry It Sucks shirts because I always wanted one. And that's where my bias lies. But so they had t-shirts that said Harry It Sucks, big thing. And so the feeling of the song was that it was a novelty song and that it was a funny song. And you kind of forget about the tragedy part of it because it's fictional, right? You don't have to be sad about somebody who's made up or whatever. I
Right.
guess that's the way I saw it when I was a kid. I'm like, they said bananas a bunch of times, and Big John's voice is funny.
Yeah.
And the old man on the bus.
Yeah.
It sure must have been something. And then, of course, talking about when the truck crashed, it smeared for 400 yards along the hills that lead into Scranton, Pennsylvania, 30,000 pounds of bananas. And you're just thinking about smeared mashed bananas everywhere. And you're like, okay, that's funny. However, um, apparently Eugene Sesky's family did not find it funny, understandably. And there's a lot of stuff on message boards that you can find, people's opinions. I only found one newspaper article about his son. It was a like an interview with the son, And according to the Sun, he was very upset about it. And he went to one of Harry's concerts, sat through the concert, sat through the Banana Song, and then went and met him backstage and had a meeting with him backstage. And he explained to him that he was upset and angry over it, and that Harry Chapin apologized and promised that all of his royalties would then go to the family. And
Right.
of course, yeah, in the newspaper article it says, and I haven't received a dime, you know. Now, we talked about this before when I first pitched this episode to you. There's a lot of possibilities to that story. First of all, it could be completely false. I'm not sure how easy it would be to go backstage at a concert. Maybe it was different in the 70s. Maybe it was different with Harry Chapin. He would have had to set up a meeting in a special way. Maybe he did. I feel like it would have been in more than one source. But also, let's just say for the sake of argument that Harry Chapin did apologize because he didn't realize and he felt bad. And then promised, first of all, I don't think he would have promised royalties to anybody because by that time he was already well on his way.
Hmm.
He was already a professional. He was already on stage. He was already at concerts. I think he probably would have known by now that those things aren't really in his power.
Right.
But maybe he didn't know that. Maybe he did promise royalties. Maybe he promised royalties just to bullshit the guy and get him out of his backstage area. I don't really see that from all the stories about Harry Chapin. I don't think he was that kind of an asshole, but maybe he did. Maybe he's like, get this guy out of here, promise him royalties. What's he going to do about it? Even if he did legitimately promise royalties and apologize, he may not have realized that that's not in his power. Once you're an artist that's famous and once you work with a record label, the ownership of your music is not always with you. The ownership of your royalties, the ownership of all your stuff, especially in the 70s. I mean, for crying out loud, like, didn't Paul McCartney have to buy his songs from Yoko
Yep.
that he wrote? Like, so, like I'm not sure that it would have been a possibility for him to pay royalties. I think nowadays that could have happened. You could say, listen, I'm going to make this happen. And you would talk to your agent, talk to your record label and say, this is important. This needs to happen. But I really don't think back then, even if he did make that promise, that it would have been something that the record company would have been willing to do or that Harry would have been able to do. So that's one part. The second part, this guy's already mad. He's already angry and he already wants, when he's doing this interview with the newspaper, his intention by doing this interview is to make Harry Chapin look like a really bad guy who's trying to tarnish his father's good name. So he's not going to say at the end of the article, and everything worked out fine. He's obviously going in there saying, this is what happened. I went in there and I asked him for money and he said he'd give it to me, but he didn't. I'm not sure. I'm not sure any of it happened. And if it did, it was a totally different conversation than he's saying it was.
Right.
And also, the kind of newspaper article that it wasn't like a reporting article. It was an interview style article, and
Hmm.
it was like, it really wasn't well written either. They they spelled the guy's name wrong, first of all. Like they put his wrong name, like his wrong first name. So it wasn't even the son's real name, and they spelled his last name wrong. And so, and like how journalists can be sometimes, they can change what you write. You can talk to a journalist about something you feel, and they're going to release an article, and it might not be exactly what you think it is. But now
Right.
you've given them something on the record, and they can do whatever they want with it. It could have been so many different things because I don't see any lawsuits. There's no evidence of any kind of legal action, anything. All it says is controversy, and it's like the family was upset and they don't want to talk about it, which is understandable. That would be like the normal response. Don't want to talk about it. But there are a lot of people online who are like, yeah, I don't listen to Harry Chapin because of what he did. And I grew up two streets down from the Seskys and they're great people and all this kind of stuff. And then I saw another person on a message board saying, yeah, I used to live next door to the Seskys and those kids used to throw rocks at us all the time. Like it's just people being people.
Right.
Um, they did seem like a regular, normal family. I know the Sun, I saw that a lot of articles about the Sun. This is another thing that makes me think that, the interview was a little bit fishy. I saw so many articles about the Sun when I was looking him up. And
Right.
I could almost track his whole young adulthood because like when he graduated from high school, he had graduated from a special program. When he got into the military, I saw that. I saw his marriage stuff. I saw the wife's obituary.
Mhm.
They all lived in the same area. I saw like something about the sister when she got married. Nothing about any of this that I could really find. No newspaper articles that I could really find. So I don't know. I think it was just kind of biased but I guess I can see I guess I can see both sides to the controversy because I try to put myself in the place of somebody that this happened to. If it was like, like my dad and if your dad's 33, you're a young child probably at this time. Or you could be as old as a teenager, but like you're probably a young child. And you know that your dad died in a really bad truck accident. And it affected the whole town, and there were people hurt, and it was really bad. They changed rules because of it, and it was just a tragedy. And then you hear this 10 years later, you hear this song on the radio, and it's talking about basically the accident was the driver's fault.
Right.
Because in the song, I don't think it was intentional, but Harry Chapin's kind of implying that he's distracted because he's thinking about his new wife and he didn't see the sign and he missed the sign because it says he passed a sign that he should have seen saying shift to low gear, $50 fine, my friend. And they're basically saying he's thinking about his wife. And in reality, you know that your father did shift into lower gear and he did everything he was supposed to do. And in fact, when the accident was happening, when the truck was out of control, he did everything in his power, including basically sacrificing his life. Because, even if the truck rolled over, he may have survived if he was inside the truck. But he gets out of the truck and he's waving his arms and he's trying to get everybody out of the way. And then he flips that truck over to avoid a gas station, knowing that it would cause a huge explosion in a residential area. Like, your dad tried his best in his last moments to not hurt anybody else, not thinking about himself. And then, you get this song about, it's just a young kid who was distracted by lust, basically. So I can understand why a lot of people would be upset by that. But the rest of the song, I mean, also like, there's some lightheartedness. There's some light made out of it. It's just like, haha, he lost his head, not to mention an arm or two. And also the line about he said Christ, which is funny how he named the only man who could save him now. And he says it in a grave tone, but okay, that's a good joke. Like,
Yep.
I get it. I get how that would piss you off if you're already upset. And just about everything about that song, if you were already upset, I can understand. And then you start talking about the bananas, which is like totally irrelevant to the death of this man, what
Yep.
he was hauling, you know. But it's like that the truck that overturned and it had like spaghettios or whatever, like you
Mm.
you would laugh about that and you're like, I hope the driver's okay. Like nobody would ask that question except for certain people,
True. True.
you know, people talk about like ramen noodles
Thirty
hitting, yeah.
thousand lobsters wouldn't be funny. So.
No, no, that's a lot of lobster. But yeah, so like, yeah, I totally get it. If you listen to the words of the song from the perspective of a family of somebody who died in that accident, man, that would really piss you off.
Yep.
But, but if you think about the song itself in the perspective of the telling of a story of a tragic thing that happened, telling it in such a way that guaranteed everybody who hears it is going to remember it,
Yep.
and guaranteed they're going to tell it to people, including telling about it on a bus because it's such an interesting story because of the bananas. You know, if you think about it from that perspective as a song that was in the tradition of so many of those folk disaster songs, and
Yeah.
Big Bad John is an example I already brought up, but I'm sure you can think of a couple more about songs that are about disasters, but they're also catchy and lighthearted. I mean, it's a song. It's not a funeral dirge. It's a song that's supposed to be told over and over again. So it's supposed to be catchy. We talked about how musical learning is a very big thing. And actually, we talked about this before we started the episode. We were talking
Right.
about Sesame Street. We talked about how turning a lesson into a song is very important for the brain. It's very important for your mind. It's important for your memory. And if you were just telling somebody about, oh wow, did you know that in March of 1965, this truck accident, it was really horrible, and this guy died, and like, he ran into houses and trees and stuff, and he overturned the truck, and then he was gone, and they changed the rules about it. Somebody would go, huh, that's interesting. All you have to do is say the word bananas, and somebody will remember it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the next thing you do is make it into a song. Everybody's going to remember it, and that's how folk songs work. So I guess I'm defending it because it's a folk song, and I don't think Harry Chapin meant offense. He wasn't the kind of guy that wanted to offend somebody or make fun of somebody or make light of death.
Mm.
I mean, even he could have totally made fun of the dance band on the Titanic when he did that song, but it was actually kind of a sad song. you know, he has a lot of examples of doing that.
Yeah,
So I don't know. What do you think? I've talked enough.
I tend to agree with all your thoughts on it. I think that a lot of times with songs, they put these songs together uh, and they have the original thoughts of how they want to do it, and they spend a lot of time collaborating and putting together a song that's going to be, uh, in his case, storytelling and entertaining at the same time.
Right.
Uh, it it's like anything else, there's always people that are going to criticize no matter how you do it. Um, so the best you can do is put together a song that tells a story that's important, and it's like anything. It's almost like anything you do. You know, people can be offended by just about anything. Uh,
Hmm. Yeah.
so you do the best you can, and I think from if you just look at it from just what it is, pure entertainment. It's like getting affected by uh, by something that's meant to is entertainment. Uh, if you try to offend somebody, that's one thing. But if you don't try to offend somebody and they become offended, it's really not your fault.
Right.
So anyway,
Yeah.
that's I know I'm yeah you went into much better detail than I did, but you kind of I go along with what you're saying, and I take it for what it is. Telling a story that's tragic, yet you can't get by and I don't care how you cut it, you can't get by the humor of the bananas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And it kind of in some ways it kind of helps you as a human who is not related to the situation, not be depressed by it.
yep.
My perspective definitely changed over the years on that song. Of course, when I was a kid, I mean, because you used to also sing along with it too.
Yep.
So my moments of entertainment and fun were you and John Wallace saying, oh bananas, and like the guy on the bus, he's just like mashed bananas, you know.
Something.
It's cute,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's obviously it's funny and it's cute because it's the human condition.
Yep.
But when I was a kid, it was funny because it's bananas. And then as I got older, I understood, I'm not this person's family, but I understood that you can take tragic stuff that's just a little bit off kilter and a little bit quirky, and it's pretty interesting because of how it happened. And it's kind of good that it gives you a little giggle when
Yep.
you think about the mashed bananas, because you're like really depressing hearing about this guy who died. And actually it's more depressing when you learn that he was older. Like when you think he was like a young kid, you're like stupid young kid. So that was kind of a bad choice, I think, on Harry Chapin's part. But like, like when you think about, geez, this guy actually died, and like a lot of people got hurt and all this kind of stuff, but it's like there was
Mm.
bananas everywhere. Like it's kind of like, oh man, what a mess. Like you're not even thinking of it like that's funny, haha. You're thinking of it like, oh my God, what a nightmare. Like
Yep.
the people had to clean that up and they had to, there's banana, the whole place must have smelled like the molasses flood.
Yep. Oh yeah.
A
Yep.
lot of people died in the molasses flood in Boston, but it's still kind of funny because it's molasses and it smelled like molasses. Like I kind of equate those two things in a way because it's kind of silly that it's just like, oh no, it's molasses coming my way. You're not thinking that it's like boiling hot molasses killing
Yeah.
people and
Yeah.
horses, and dogs and stuff. You're thinking about like, oh my God, everything's gonna be so sticky. And there's gonna be flies everywhere. And like, so that's what I don't know. So, but I do think I do think it's important to mention that this person was a real person who had a family. And I do think it does kind of suck for the people who lived in that town because in that area of town it was a very small town thing. There's a lot of people named Seski in that town. And his community, I did some research on him. I mean, his like church and his everything. He was part of like the Polish community. There was a lot of Polish people in that area. And of course they're all like, there's a culture there. There's a friendship there. There's people seem to be very close in that area of Scranton, and Scranton's kind of small. And so I can kind of understand how a lot of people in the town didn't really like that spotlight put on them either.
Yeah.
Um, because also when you think of Scranton, Pennsylvania, if you're my age or older, you think of two things. You think of The Office and you think of that song.
Yeah.
And I went to Scranton for that reason. And
Yeah.
when I got there, well, there's no bananas anywhere on the streets, and also no office. The office wasn't there. Um, but the town was kind of dying. Like it's not a very prosperous
Yeah.
town anymore because it was like, it's like Harry Chapin said in the beginning of the song. He was actually, I can understand the people of Scranton not liking it because he kind of was dissing the town a little bit, but basically he was trying to paint it as a working class town.
Yep. Yeah.
But he was saying, where children play without despair in backyard slag heaps. That's painting an image of a town that's not a pretty little suburb. And
Right.
so I can imagine the people of Scranton were like, yeah, we live in a place full of like, because it was coal mining and stuff. And
Right.
so that the kids are playing in the dirty slag heaps. He wasn't doing it to diss them. He was doing it to paint the town as a working class town, this tragedy that happened to a working class man. And that's what folk songs are about. They're about the working class.
Yep.
But anyway, I feel very strongly about
Okay. All
it.
right.
But that is the story of Eugene Seski and the 30,000 pounds of whatever he was hauling, but it was totally bananas. All right, folks, that is our show. If you can go to Apple Podcasts and give us a rating and maybe subscribe, because that would really help us be more visible so more people can hear our zaniness and our silliness and our awesomeness. If you like, please send us an email at mochiverse@gmail.com. That's MOCCIAVERSE@gmail.com. Let us know what you think. Give us suggestions for future episodes and tell us what you think about bananas. Are they funny or are they not funny? I think they're funny, but maybe you're from Scranton. Maybe you don't think they're funny. Um, bananas.
Yeah.
Bananas.
Yeah.
So, Dad, would you like to lighten the mood a little bit?
There we go. Here we go. Okay. Anyway, skating out of here. What's the best animal in soccer?
What?
The scorpion.
Oh, okay.
Yep. What's the difference between a quarterback and a baby?
What?
One takes a snap, the other one takes a nap.
Oh, you'll have to explain that one to me at some point.
Okay. Quarterback. Okay.
You can explain it later. I don't.
Yeah.
Other people understand sports. So you don't have to
Yeah,
bore
there we
them.
go. You might understand this one. I used to be addicted to basketball, but I rebounded.
I do get that one.
And why can't pigs play soccer?
Why?
They hog the ball.
They do.
Yeah. Why shouldn't you play tennis in the jungle?
Why?
Too many cheetahs.
Oh my God.
What does one sports fan have in common with an angry chicken? A foul mouth.
You could have done that for the tennis one
That's
with
true.
a very specific tennis player.
Right. Very specific tennis player. Why couldn't the baby score in basketball?
I can guess.
He was always dribbling.
He's always dribbling. Oh my
But
God. We were talking last episode about Ray Stevens, and he made a joke in The Streak, that song The Streak,
Mhm.
and he managed to make that into a dirty joke, but just dirty, just subtle enough a dirty joke that it could still be played on Christian radio when he was talking about this. Do you remember the song The Streak?
I do, but I don't remember all the words. You're
Well,
better at that than I am.
he showed up at the local basketball game wearing nothing but his sneakers or whatever,
It's
and
just
he ran by, yeah, and he ran by, and he was a dribbling.
yep.
It's nasty. So that's it, I think, folks. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Daddy wasn't finding a bow wow. Daddy wasn't finding a bow wow. I've got a little cat. I'm very fond of that. I'd rather have a big bow wow.
Scranton, Pencil. All right, I can't even say Scranton.
Blah 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 blah.
Scranton Bazibadad.
I know what happened. Your tongue got in the way of your eye teeth and couldn't see what you were saying.
Got my merds wixed.
Oh.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello.